Good evening. My name is Ashok Kamath, and I'm the secretary of the IIT Alumni Center, Bengaluru. Welcome to our continuing series of Saturday webinars. This is something we started when the lockdowns were announced, and every Saturday we've been having uh, a webinar on a different topic. And we've had a very enthusiastic response to these webinars. Today, we bring somewhat unusual, especially in Bangalore. When you think clouds, mostly people think of cloud computing. But we have a real cloud scientist, Professor Rama Govindarajan, who is a senior professor at ICTS, which is part of TIFR. Her research has always been in fluid mechanics, and she's taken fluid mechanics to the study of droplets and particles in fluid, and on the dynamics of clouds themselves. So I'm sure she'll be able to tell us things that we didn't know about the Indian monsoon, which either brings in a lot of happiness or a great deal of sorrow, depending on the year. Rama is a graduate of IIT Delhi, and then did her PhD at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and then did postdoc work at Caltech. And winner of many awards, Bhatnagar Award being one of them. Moderating for her is Professor Jason Picardo, who's currently at IIT Bombay. Jason did his PhD from IIT Madras and did a postdoc stint at ICTS here in Bangalore, and now is on the faculty at IIT Bombay. Few housekeeping issues. There are no certificates for attending this talk. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. Do not put them in the chat because they may not be monitored. So if you have a question, please do put it in the Q&A box. And the format we will follow today is that Rama will speak for through half her presentation, and then we'll have a short break during which Jason will moderate some of the questions, and then Rama will continue and we will end. We will stop by 6:30 Indian Standard Time. And, right now, over to you, Rama.
Thank you, Ashok. Thank you, Sushila. I'll now share my screen. Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to talk today about why we should care about turbulence in clouds. And here I've put two pictures which are very, indicative of our daily life now. So on this top is a picture of a cloud at sunset, and it's a monsoon cloud taken in Bangalore over the last few days. And we see this every day. The monsoon is an important part of our daily life nowadays. On the bottom is a picture with a person in a mask. This is Mona Lisa, of course, but this has become a very standard thing in our lives again. And we're going to talk about why turbulence enters both of these things, and we're going to talk about the connection between them. So one thing that worries us nowadays is how we are going to avoid the spread of COVID infection. And this is a hot topic with already a very large number of publications come out. Now, obviously, a lot of people are studying about masks. And if you wear a mask, how well do you protect yourself and others? And whereas in our discussion, we're not going to talk about masks at all. The reason is that we would like to go back to a place where we can, or at least we would like to understand how far we can go back to life without masks, like a nice social location, a classroom, all the crowded situations that we're used to. It would be very nice to not have a mask if we can understand when we can go without it. Okay, so both rain, and we're talking about clouds in the sky, and we're talking about COVID. Both of these are to do with droplets. They're both about falling droplets. So at the base of a cloud here you see, so this is a droplet. We'll talk about A, small a, as always the radius of the droplet. It starts with an initial radius A0, and then as it falls, it keeps evaporating. It's falling through relatively dry air over here beneath the cloud. It keeps evaporating, so water vapor escapes out of this object, and it therefore becomes smaller and smaller as it drops. And now here you see a, an image of a streak line made by cough droplets from a human coughing. This is an actual human who's coughing. They've taken a picture with time lapse so that you see the trace of the line made by each little droplet that's coming out of the cough. This is also about falling droplets. So whether it's a cough, whether it's a sneeze, whether it's loud talking, like I'm doing right now, you can have lots of droplets coming out of a person's mouth. And not all of these may be relevant for COVID infection, but we're interested in this thing in general to understand how droplets can carry not just COVID, but all kinds of infections. So this and clouds is what we're going to talk about today. Now, in both of these, there is a competition between evaporation and the speed with which the droplet falls down. So we all want rain in the monsoon. So we do not want all our tiny drops evaporating before they hit the ground. So in that place, evaporation is an undesirable thing, and we want all the droplets to fall on the ground. So we want them to, come with a very fast terminal velocity and fall on the ground. Whereas we want the opposite in cough. We want every droplet to evaporate if possible, so that they don't fall on the ground or on other surfaces which other people can then touch and catch the infection. So while they're airborne, if they evaporate, then that's relatively good for us apparently. And I don't know whether this is established yet, but apparently in dry air they don't survive. The virus doesn't survive for too long. So this is the contradiction here between clouds and cough droplets. The dogma in the field is that if your droplet is very small, it's going to evaporate before it falls. So we don't have to worry about small droplets in the context of COVID, and the small droplets will never give us rain. If they're big droplets, they fall before they evaporate because they're falling pretty fast as they come down. So then we don't have to worry about evaporation in this context. So we are going to challenge especially the first thing, which says that small droplets evaporate before they fall. They may not fall very fast, but their evaporation may be a lot slower than we thought about. And this is one of the places where turbulence will come in. Okay, so when you have a bigger drop, you have a faster fall and a slower evaporation. So here I've got this little diagram which shows a force balance on a tiny little droplet. It could be from a cough, or it could be a little droplet inside a cloud. It could be any of those. So it's usually in steady state. It very quickly comes to steady state. So there's weight which is acting downwards, and an equal and opposite drag which is acting upwards. And this drag is given by two different formulae for very, very small drops which are less than 50 micron in size. And a micron is 10 to the minus 6 of a meter. So there is like 1,000 microns in a millimeter. So these are very, very small drops. If the radius A is less than 50 microns, then the drag is given by this formula. It's called the Stokes formula for drag. So this is V, which is the vertical velocity of the droplet. So like when it comes to a steady state, we know the weight of the droplet. It's the volume of the drop times the density of air. And I've neglected the buoyancy term here because the droplet is so much heavier than air. water is 1,000 times heavier than air. So you have this as the formula 6 pi nu. Nu is the kinematic viscosity. It doesn't matter if you don't follow what that is. It's a kind of friction that the air gives to the droplet. It stops the droplet from falling down. It gives resistance. And then rho A is the density of the air. So in this thing, like this is drag, and if you write down the drag equal to weight formula, you will get that the velocity of this droplet is proportional to the radius square. So all that we need to understand here is, if the droplet doubles in size, doubles in radius, then it falls 4 times faster. That's what happens to smaller droplets. They fall faster and faster as their size increases. What happens to bigger droplets? Bigger droplets, they also fall faster as their size increases, but their velocity increases slower as a square root of the size as they fall. So this is basically how the drag acts on them. There's no need to remember these formulae or anything. So the idea is just to say that they fall faster and faster as their size increases. Now, how does this falling time compete with evaporation time? So the formula for evaporation is given by Clausius-Clapeyron. It doesn't matter what it is, but after a few pages of algebra, you can actually derive for a small drop this very easy formula, which says that A times the rate at which A changes, where T is time, dA by dt is the derivative with respect to time, A times the rate at which the droplet size changes is proportional to the supersaturation. So S is the saturation, and S minus 1 is the supersaturation. So we all know that on a rainy day, our clothes will not dry very easily. And that's because the air already has so much water vapor in it that there's no way for more water vapor to escape from the clothes onto the air. And so because of that, if S is equal to 1, that means if the air is saturated, then your radius of the droplet will not change whatsoever. Your clothes will not dry whatsoever. C is a constant. It doesn't matter what it is now. Okay. Now, if the air is totally dry, you have S equal to 0 on the other hand, and the droplet can evaporate reasonably fast. So S is also a function of temperature. So we know that on a cold day, our clothes don't dry very fast, whereas on a hot day, our clothes dry very fast. So then if the temperature is higher, the S value is higher. That means more water vapor can escape into the air than at cold temperatures. So this is basically the same story as our clothes, which is told about a droplet. So all we need to know is if S is equal to 1 or S is close to 1, our droplet will not evaporate whatsoever. And it may even grow if S is greater than 1. Like water vapor can come and condense onto this droplet, and it can grow and grow as happens in a cloud. Okay, so now let's just talk about from the base of a cloud or from a coughing person, how far do these droplets go? And so like I just told you about all these formulae which are not important for further discussion. They're just to convince you that there's a competition between falling and evaporation, and which happens faster. And then we can use these formulae and maybe even fancier versions of these formulae, which we won't go into, to decide like what happens to different size droplets. And we're all interested, especially now, in our cough droplets. So like if somebody is coughing without a mask on and without covering their mouth with their elbow or any such thing, then how bad is it going to be for everybody around them? This is the basic question we are asking. And here, so like for a 25 micron droplet, which is a very, very teeny droplet, it will evaporate in about 3 seconds in dry air. And it will go a total distance of about 10 centimeters, which is much less than a, foot ruler. It will go only that distance, and then it evaporates if the air is dry. But remember the air may not always be totally dry. So then like in 3 seconds, it will vanish and I don't have to worry. So if somebody is coughing, you know, all droplets of this order, then I don't have to worry if the air is bone dry. Now for a 1 millimeter droplet, everything changes. It can live for many, many minutes. In fact, it lives more than minutes, and it can actually travel kilometers before. So if you're talking now about a cloud, you can have a raindrop which is 1 millimeter at the base of a cloud which is like some kilometers above us, and it will reach the ground practically unevaporated. So raindrops above a millimeter or so are going to reach the ground very, very comfortably without losing much of themselves. Now in a cough fluid, I'm calling a cough fluid as something that's coming out of your mouth when you're coughing, and that has an S of somewhere between 0.85 to 1. So that means the rate of evaporation is slow. So this is bad news for us. The 25 micron droplet may not vanish. Okay, so now let's talk about this cough thing again, and we'll talk about projectile motion. So when I'm coughing, I'm actually giving out a forward velocity of about 3 meters per second. I'm letting out I'm expelling some air from my mouth, which is already traveling at 3 meters per second. So my 25 micron droplet can actually be a free rider on this. So it may not, you know, die within 10 centimeters. It can travel 1 meter or more, even if the air is totally dry. And the air may not be totally dry. And here is where turbulence is going to enter. Right in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about turbulence. So then, whereas the big droplet, it goes at 10 meters per second. So here I've given U as the horizontal velocity and V as the vertical velocity. So this guy will fall to the ground in 50 centimeters, even when I'm coughing at a speed like this. And then like it can contaminate all surfaces, it would not have evaporated. But fortunately, we don't have many 1 millimeter droplets when we cough. We have a few, but not that many. Also, I should mention that even talking loudly, like there's a debate on between whether coughing is worse than talking loudly, and the jury is out on this. So there too, droplets will fall to the ground. And talking softly always helps. Now we're talking about turbulence. Let's take a short break from the the droplets we've been talking about, and talk just about flows in general. So whenever you have a flow, and by a flow, I mean any fluid which is a liquid or a gas which is moving. That's about all that we're going to define as a flow. So when we have a bunch of fluid that's moving, if the scales are big, if the length scale is large, then almost always it's turbulent. So turbulence is all around us. It's ubiquitous. We don't often see it. Like here is two instances where we can actually see the turbulence. Here there's something burning and a lot of soot is being carried into the air along with the turbulence. So you see how very complicated this flow is. It's not like a smooth flow. So that's why we're talking about turbulence, because almost everything that's flowing is turbulent, whether it be a river or it be, air in the atmosphere. It's almost always turbulent. In the ocean, there's a lot of turbulence, and only rarely we see it. Like here is a volcano and its eruption. Again, a lot of ash is going into the atmosphere, so we're able to view it. Otherwise, we cannot view it unless we do some special experiments to view it. But believe me, it's always there. And even when I'm now talking, there's turbulence in front of my face. In fact, all of you are sitting still and the air above your heads is turbulent because you are warmer than the surroundings and a plume is rising above you. So if only you could see turbulence, you'd see it absolutely everywhere. And now this is a simulation of a blood flow through a mechanical heart. And you see that the lines that the blood flows in is extremely turbulent. So turbulence is a kind of state the flow is in. It is very, very counterintuitive. because normally we are used to Newton's second law for bodies, and we know that force is equal to mass into acceleration. For example, if I throw a cricket ball, I expect the cricket ball to go in a straight line according to how I throw it, or I expect it to swing or spin according to what I tell it to do. I don't expect it to walk backwards, change its mind, make rotary motion, and do all of this. But that's what fluid does. Fluid is still obeying Newton's laws, mind you. So on an average, it's going in the direction in which it's being pushed, but it wastes a lot of kinetic energy in doing random motion, sometimes backwards, sometimes forwards, on an average forward. So it's extremely chaotic. It's very, very difficult to predict because it's like an extreme example of chaos. And so like when you look at it, it looks very random, but it's very different from other things we're used to as being random. For example, it's not white noise. It's not just some jitter. It's highly space and time correlated. That means that if I know something about turbulence at one place, I can actually tell, what it's going to be at other places in the vicinity and at future and past times. And if you want me to describe turbulence in one word, I would say it is vortical. And this photo that you're seeing here is actually just flow past any plate. So like suppose you switched your fan on and your table is sitting there, your bed or something is sitting there. Then this is what the flow looks like on it. This is what the flow looks like on an aircraft wing, very close to the wing, very close to the table, like 1 centimeter or half a centimeter from the table. So you can see that there's a lot of structure to it. It's not complete arbitrary jitter. So here you have this pattern of what is known as horseshoe vortices. So in these red regions, this quantity called the vorticity, and don't worry if you cannot understand what curl is. Vorticity is the curl of the velocity vector, and this quantity vorticity is very high. So all that it means is that rotational motion is very, very high in these places which are marked red, and very low in the places which are marked blue, and intermediate in the regions which are marked green. So in any flow, any turbulent flow, there's places where the vorticity is extremely high, there's places where the vorticity is lower, and the places where the vorticity is extremely high is organized into tubular structures. Like here you see a tubular structure, and everything around this tube is rotating. So like the whole tube itself is spinning around extremely fast, and it has an effect on everything else. It makes everything else spin and gets spun around by everything else as well. So it's an extremely complicated thing that's going on here. Now let's talk about cloud formation. We'll return to turbulence, but we'll talk about cloud formation now. So we have here, let's say the ocean. So any surface which has some moisture in it, it could also be land. So here is a puff of air which is evaporating due to high temperature. So like the sun is shining on this thing, and there's a little puff of warm air that's coming out. And because this thing is very wet, this puff is taking with it some humidity. So it's carrying along with it some water vapor. And now, like as it rises in altitude, so it is going to keep rising through the atmosphere. And these things that you see in red are little aerosol droplets. Everywhere in the cloud, you have aerosol droplets. And this thing like climbs up, up and up. And we'll talk about what the aerosol droplets do in a minute. So here is this thing. Why is it climbing up? It's climbing up mainly because it's warmer than its surroundings. This little puff of wet air is warmer than its surroundings. Also, water vapor is lighter than air, but that contribution is very small. The main contribution is because it's warmer, it's less dense. So it's lighter. And anything that's lighter is rising through the air. So this is the initial part of cloud formation. Cloud formation is going on the ground all the time, except that we cannot see it on a normal day. We cannot see it because we have no way of visualizing it. the temperature in the atmosphere as it rises keeps falling. You know that when we are flying in an aircraft, the temperature outside is like minus 40 degrees. And so the temperature keeps falling in this manner as you go up and up in the atmosphere. And we'll see in a minute what that does. The relative humidity keeps going up because the temperature is going down. The typical relative humidity is higher. So as this puff rises and rises, it's carrying a lot of wetness. Its relative humidity is increasing as it climbs up and up until a point where it reaches S equal to 1. That means its humidity is equal to saturation. And above it, it gets super saturated and you start seeing tiny little droplets of water condensing onto these aerosol particles. You see these droplets condensing onto the aerosol particles. So if you did not have aerosol particles, you would never get any condensation. So that is basically why you need aerosol. Aerosols are therefore called cloud condensation nuclei. And so a cloud forms. So this is a basic idea why a cloud forms. And once the water droplets are formed, you start seeing this white object. You see this white object with because the way the water droplets are reflecting light. Okay, so we discussed this cloud formation in the previous slide where we said there's a blob of warm, moist air. As it climbs up, it actually keeps increasing in volume till it becomes a cloud. And it doesn't increase that fast as the cough, but I'll come to that. So this increases in volume due to a thing called entrainment, which we will be discussing. Now, this is a cough cloud. So similarly, this thing, you know, a person coughs a small volume and the volume that the cough fluid occupies becomes bigger and bigger as, you know, it goes downstream. And this can be both good and bad. It is bad because like the further, I mean, even if you're not in the line of sight of the person, actually, even if you're not in that line of sight, you can get infected. So that's the bad news. The good news is that as this blob grows and grows, it's entraining outside air into it. And therefore, as the outside air comes in, it becomes drier and drier relatively. So the total humidity that a person coughing had expelled goes down. And so these droplets evaporate faster. Okay, so like now let's summarize. What is a cloud fluid? A cloud fluid is mainly air, overwhelmingly air. It also has a small amount of water vapor. It has temperature variations because wherever droplets condense, there is heat, latent heat given out. Wherever there's evaporation, there's evaporative cooling. And also because these things move through air, and so a cloud moves through at an atmosphere where the temperature is changing as a function of height. In a cough fluid, your body is warmer than the surroundings typically, except on a hot summer day. And so like you're expelling this warm fluid, which cools as it goes down just by exposure to outside air. And then there's a suspension of tiny water droplets. A cough fluid is exactly the same as a cloud fluid. They both contain the same ingredients. Their dynamics, how they respond to forces is very similar, therefore. They're both turbulent, as we are going to talk about. And so it turns out that whatever methods we employ to study a cloud fluid, we can employ to study cough fluid. And so when I say dynamics, I just mean how the flow conducts itself in response to outside applied forces. So now, a very vast majority of large-scale flows and fast fluid flows are turbulent. As I said, turbulence is ubiquitous. And two good examples are clouds as well as cough flow. So now, on the other extreme, if you have a very, very small scale flow, like a micro flow, and it's very slow, then these flows are typically laminar. Laminar means it's more like an intuitive kind of streamline flow, straight line flow, where it just moves in the direction in which you're applying pressure. So all kinds of strange things like in turbulence are not happening. And this flow is also important for us because very, very small droplets in a cloud or even in a cough fluid do not see turbulence. The smallest, funny eddy that happens in turbulence is about a millimeter. And these droplets are way smaller than that. It's a millimeter in certain flows. These droplets are micron size. They're way smaller than that. So they see a very streamlined flow near them. So this is the strange thing. Like they see laminar flow inside when you zoom in, zoom in, zoom in into a turbulent flow. So this quantity, for those who are interested, there is a ratio called the Reynolds number, which is the inertia, which is a typical velocity scale times a typical length scale of the fluid divided by the kinematic viscosity. And the higher and higher this is, the more and more a flow is prone to turbulence. In air, the kinematic viscosity is 10 to the power of minus 5 meters square per second, whereas the U and L are in meter per second and hundreds of meters it could be. And so the Reynolds number is a very, very big number. Okay, so whenever you have a big Reynolds number, you have turbulence. Clouds are turbulent. They contain water vapor, droplets, and aerosol particles, as we've seen. They're very, very turbulent because the Reynolds number is 100 million. Now, but they contain water vapor and water droplets. But when you fly through a cloud, of course, when you fly through a cloud, you already know it's turbulent. The pilot tells you wear your seat belt. And you know that, this powder puff looking innocent thing which you see from the ground can actually throw you around here and there, even when you're in a big aircraft. You know it's turbulent, but when you look out of your window, you don't really see large amounts of water droplets. So you get an instinctive feeling that it's very, very dilute in water droplets. So then, like, if it's very dilute and the droplets are all 10 micron, by bumblebee logic, and I'll tell you what bumblebee logic is, but basically if I've done a simple calculation, there should be no rain. But turbulence is going to make it rain. And so this is what a small portion of the cloud looks like in the vertical rotational structures, if you could see rotationality. So like these vertical structures are the building block of turbulence, according to us. So now we'll talk about another very important property of entrainment, of turbulence, which is entrainment. So like all of us have seen images like this. This is an ISRO rocket taking off. You can see all kinds of turbulent flows which are in the form of jets. You will always see an opening angle, a very clean and constant opening angle. And so if you zoom in to a particular portion, the fact that there is an opening angle is telling you that outside air is being included in this, because this thing is incompressible flow. So if it's expanding as it goes down, it's actually pulling in air which was not moving before and now forcing that air to move. And here I put a little black rectangle which looks like this if you zoom in. There are these big vertical structures and also many small vertical structures which effectively pull in, outside air by rolling the air into itself. So like all this outside air is entrained or sucked into the turbulent flow, and then it starts moving with the flow. This is a very, very important thing. And the same thing is happening to this person coughing. It's being visualized by a Schlieren image, which basically uses optical techniques, small changes in refractive index to, see how we cough. And so the same thing is happening there. So in all of this, it's very important that outside air is being pulled in, and the fact that outside air is being pulled in results in dilution. So like here you see a jet which was very black in color with some dye. It's now diluted. So the droplets that it carries, whatever it's carrying, is becoming dilute as it goes down, because this thing is sharing its momentum with outside air which is being pulled in. It's actually slowing down on an average. Everybody is sharing their momentum, so more things are moving and they're moving slower than before. And this provides, fortunately or unfortunately for us, opportunity for evaporation. So small droplets, and also it carries the small droplets to greater length with itself. So small droplets go along with the jet and then fall much more slowly to the ground. In bigger droplets, gravity wins and it falls more than it's being dragged with the fluid. So this is a good place for a break. Jason, if you can take over now, if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Yes, thanks Rama for very nice first half of the talk. And there have been people in the audience expressing their thanks that they've been able to follow things very clearly. So there are a couple of questions. One viewer would like to know something about transpiration as it relates to evaporative processes and the formation of clouds.
So transpiration is an important part of the formation of clouds. So that's why we really need forests. Like if we cut down all our forests, then we're losing out on a lot of water that could go back into the atmosphere. So that's basically what I would like to say, that we need to increase our forest cover and conserve our forest cover, because apart from direct evaporation over the oceans and evaporation from lakes and rivers and some surface moisture on the soil, transpiration is crucial for us.
Okay, and we have another question related to the picture of the opening angle of the rocket exhaust.
Yeah.
So the question is, aren't these hot gases compressible? And yes, why should we think of them as an incompressible flow?
Okay, so yes, like when the rocket speeds up a lot, the hot gases are indeed compressible. But like when the Mach number of the rocket approaches 1 or crosses 1, then things become compressible. But right in the beginning, the speeds are low. So every time speeds are low, you can actually derive this in fluid mechanics. You can show that flow, like air behaves like an incompressible fluid, or any fluid behaves like it's incompressible. So the velocity of sound is 300 meter per second of that order in air. So if you're way lower than that, you can think of yourself as incompressible.
Yeah, another viewer would like to know what happens to the virus when the droplet eventually evaporates, whether we understand that.
What happens to the virus? Yeah, so like I've been trying to ask many experts this question. So one thing you have to appreciate is that my entire experience with cough droplets dates back to April. So like I'm a veteran of 2 months in this area. So I've been interviewing, discussing a lot with people who know better. And from what I gather, it looks like they don't exactly know, but they believe that except on surfaces, if the virus is dry and in the air, it will become dysfunctional very soon. So they feel that we need not worry about viruses that are dry and dispersed in the air. That's point number 1. Point number 2, which we can say from a fluid mechanical angle, is that this turbulence has taken over to such a degree that these virus particles are dispersed over quite some distance, and normally, like, I cannot get infected from breathing in 1 or 2 virus particles. I have to breathe in something of the order of 1,000, as I'm told by experts. So if I have not breathed in an entire droplet or something, I'm relatively safe.
There's one interesting question regarding the influence of air conditioning on the survival of droplets in rooms. So the person asking the question wonders whether the turbulence, maybe additional circulation generated by the AC, is important, and it's according whether that might cause the droplets to live longer. But I suppose also one would have to think about the humidity change.
Yes. That's correct. So like it's a combination of how the air is circulating and what the humidity is. So in a typical AC room, the humidity is maintained at 60%. So like droplet evaporation is slowed down somewhat, but not impossibly slowed down. So like you still have some evaporation taking place. At the same time, like this circulation inside a closed room, if there's not free exchange, with the outside air, this can, very quickly circulate all droplets into an entire room. So like if a person is coughing in one place and you are 1 meter away and you think you're safe, that may not be right. Like within a few seconds, it would be all over the entire room, and that can be dangerous. Secondly, the droplets can get sucked into the ventilation system, the ventilating system, and then viruses can go from one room to another. And this can be bad news in places like hospitals where the same air is circulating. So there's a lot of factors, but personally, like I've watched movies where I see that an open window is brilliant compared to AC.
Yes, just to piggyback on that, all of this just shows that this 6 feet radius idea is quite naive, and we have a lot of, there's a lot to understand and to revise that possibly.
Exactly. And my second part of my talk is about that.
So then maybe this is, if it's okay with you, Rama, we'll carry on and pick up questions later.
Okay, thanks people for the questions. Okay, so now we're talking about what turbulence does. So we talked about one thing that turbulence does, which is entrain outside air. The other thing that it does is it does funny things to clustering to droplets, and we'll see what it does in a minute. And so I promised that I'll explain what bumblebee logic is. And I said by bumblebee logic, there's no rain. So like basically when we started studying aerospace engineering, we were told that there's this thing called bumblebee logic, where every aerospace engineer knows that given a bumblebee's shape and everything, its size and its weight, we know very well that it cannot fly by all logic. The only lucky part is the bumblebee doesn't know it, so it flies. So rain is something like that. By normal logic, it shouldn't rain. So we're very, very lucky that the rain doesn't know this, and it happens. So like, what is that? And the reason for that is turbulence. Now here I've shown you a little cup of tea where somebody's put sugar in and is trying to stir it. We know that the minute we put in turbulence, namely stir it, the sugar is going to mix evenly all over the tea. So there's going to be a homogeneous distribution of sugar, and we can drink sweet tea in like a few seconds, as opposed to if I never stirred it, if I kept it extremely still, then it would take 4 months for this tea to become sweet on the top layer. So that's what turbulence does. It mixes. We think of turbulence as mixing. And here, like you just now heard Jason, conducting this talk, and he's actually given this simulation. He is a very, very good collaborator of mine. So he is kind enough to provide this simulation where we see little droplets who are living in a vertical flow. And as I run this movie, so ignore the other movie for now. As I run this movie, you see that droplets leave the vertical regions and they collect in what is called the strain regions. So wherever there's a lot of rotationality, there are no droplets there. So turbulence is demixing these droplets and putting them in certain parts of the flow. And in this left-hand side, what this movie is showing is basically that as they go out of the vortex, these droplets have many, many chances as compared to before to cluster. They're coming together. That means they're coming much, much closer together than the average dilution tells you. And because they're now much closer to each other, and due to other reasons, they collide a lot. And Jason is an expert on this. He can tell you a lot about this. And because they collide with each other, they coalesce and become bigger and bigger droplets. And so like very quickly, due to turbulence, you have very large number of big droplets, which then can fall down due to gravity very, very fast. And this is how you get rain. So this kind of thing in a cough situation, we don't know what it's doing. I don't think anybody knows what is happening in a cough situation to all our droplets, which must be getting centrifuged out of vortices in exactly the same way as in a cloud, but nobody's done a clear simulation to my knowledge. Then the fact that these droplets are centrifuging due to many reasons feeds back into the flow itself. And this we have shown again in the context of cloud, which should be again happening in the context of cough. And this should result in very quick destruction of the turbulent flow. So this should be helpful from the cough point of view. So like normally, when you look at, let's say, a bacterium in an ocean, you will say that the big wave comes and pushes the bacterium to where it likes, but the bacterium cannot do anything to the ocean. But here are these tiny micron-sized droplets, actually pretty dilute suspension of them, which are actually affecting back the flow due to phase change. This is due to the fact that they are evaporating and condensing, and they play back on the turbulence and create all these tiny, very strong vortices, which then dissipate energy very, very fast. So the turbulence dies very, very fast. So there is this very recent paper in the by Buruiba, and this is actually challenging this 1 meter distance. So Jason had just brought this up, 1 or 2 meter distance, which is a safe distance between two people. So she has shown very clearly that droplets can travel 7 to 8 meters. So then this is the American Medical Association, the journal, their journal. So then like it's shown there that droplets can travel 7 to 8 meters, and turbulence has got a very, very important role to play here. And in a previous earlier paper, she and her colleagues have argued that because of us being warmer than our surroundings, especially when we're sitting in an AC room, my body temperature is 98 degree Fahrenheit and the surroundings could be 60 or something like that. The air is buoyant. So when I cough, the air is lifting up, it's going upwards, and it's carrying all the droplets and everything it contains with it. So in turbulence, they're clustering and moving with the turbulence, and it can hit the ceiling very quickly. This is in more detailed response to a question that was asked. And it can contaminate the ventilation system. So it can actually enter the tubes which carry the air into the air conditioning ducts and create problems over there. Okay, so everything we've talked about till now tells us that both clouds and cough have things to do, cough fluid have things to do with each other, and they're extremely complicated systems. So like a lot of physics is interacting. We don't understand all this physics. We don't have a way of nailing down the interactions, making predictions. We're not there yet in both of these. So I'm not going to read it out, but I've given a lot of different kinds of physics that are interacting with each other in a cloud and in a cough droplet. Some of those are similar. You have turbulence, buoyancy, evaporation in both. But then like there's new questions about how do the viruses multiply in this environment? How do they sustain in this environment? How do they reach the place where they need to reach to create an infection? Moreover, the cloud fluid is Newtonian. That means water and air are simple fluids. Mucus is a very complicated fluid. So like its behavior can depart from many the simple fluids. So we may have to do proper simulations and experiments to understand what this thing, which goes under the name of rheology, does to the cough fluid. And just like there are many other things in a cloud, like solar radiation, the wind, the sea surface temperature, the stratification, the way the temperature goes down in the atmosphere, all these things change the behavior of a cloud locally. Similarly, there are many aspects which can actually determine who is infected and who is affected further by that infection. So like we need not just fluid mechanics, but a whole lot of other things like biological studies to go together with, even to understand what one cough does. And to make life terrible, make things very difficult to solve, is that the range of scales. So if I want to understand everything about clouds, we know that aerosol particles and little droplets are 1 micron big. We know that the cloud is on a planetary scale. This is a mind-boggling 10 to the power of 13 orders of magnitude separation. And it's very, very difficult for one study to encompass all these scales. Similarly, it's not too different in a cough. I mean, it is very different, 5 orders of magnitude, but it's still many, many orders of magnitude just to understand the spread of one cough thing, including the biology, like a virus particle is like 100 nanometers, if I remember right. So there's many orders of magnitude there as well. But you can immediately see that if I'm doing solutions, this problem may be more directly tractable than that problem. Okay, so how do we solve for this? We've understood that it's a very, very complex problem, but we want to now, solve to the point where we're making predictions. So we're going to do this, we're going to do many, many approximations and then solve it. The first approximation is that we will say that there is only a one-way coupling. The fluid moves the droplets do not move the fluid back. So they're very tiny droplets who cannot affect the flow. This can be a bad approximation sometimes. Now we solve the Navier-Stokes equations, which are nothing but Newton's second law. And in the Navier-Stokes equation, you get extra forces due to buoyancy. And buoyancy comes from temperature changes, which comes from latent heat when evaporation and condensation take place. Then the Navier-Stokes equations are also affected by how much water vapor there is, how much liquid water there is. So all these things force, the flow in a certain way. So indirectly, these droplets, although they do not move the flow directly, they change the way the flow moves, for which we then have to solve a temperature balance equation to know the temperature to put back into the Navier-Stokes. We have to solve water vapor balance equation to put it back into the Navier-Stokes. So this already is a mind-boggling set of equations. On top of that is the, billions and quadrillions of droplets in a cloud and even in a cough. If you want to solve for each droplet's motion, its change in radius, how it heats and cools its surroundings, and these are very, very, and then we're going to assume that they're very small and they're spherical. These two assumptions can be bad also. Sometimes we may need to solve for the flow inside a droplet. So like with all these assumptions, we make a simulation, and this simulation package is called MEGA 5. It's developed by the Roddam Narasimha group. And in particular, a lot of this development that we are using is made by S. Ravichandran, who belonged to my group earlier and now is in Nordita. So his code, which is developed from scratch, the MEGA 5, I shouldn't say his code, but the group's code, has come to the rescue of solving for these flows. There are other such codes elsewhere in the world, but not that many which solve, all these things in this way. So in a cloud, for flow alone, we have like such a big, range of scales. And since we're talking 3-dimensional flow, we need 10 to the 30 grid points. So when we want to solve for the flow, we want to break the flow up into little grid points and solve in each thing. And here I've only taken the smallest scale in the flow, which is a millimeter, not a micron, remember. And even then, like, there's no way that in the foreseeable future, any computer can solve, for a cloud flow. Much less can it follow each droplet, make a detailed grid around each droplet at the micron scale. Like, just forget about it. So we use a lot of simplifications, which could, give some errors in the results. And this we have to be realistic about, because that's what the state of the art can do right now. Whereas in a cough, you can actually resolve the entire flow. You may not be able to resolve each droplet in this way, no way, but you can actually resolve the flow, and you can make approximations for the droplets, and you can actually get reasonable answers. We don't have those reasonable answers yet, but we are working towards this, and many other groups in the world are now working towards this. So I'll just show you a sample simulation from Kroor. We call Ravichandran Kroor in Megha 5. So here he has the velocity, here he has the temperature, and here he has liquid water, which is all coming out of a little nozzle. So this is a model cloud, you can say. So initially there's no liquid water because the air is dry. The flow is fast here and slow there. And the temperature is cold there due to condensation, evaporation, and hot here. And this is the liquid water content. So this looks more like what a real cloud will look. It will go up there and settle down. So this is just an example of the power of Megha 5 to solve these things. And now we've done this simulation just this month on a dry cough. We haven't included phase change or evaporation condensation yet, but this is just a sample, and this simulation was done by Rohit. It's a collaboration with all these people. So here is what the simulation looks like. You can see how the turbulence is spreading. In fact, in this particular example, it's dividing into two. So you can see that the droplets can dry faster and many other things can happen. And we will see that in future simulations, hopefully. And now this is just to show you some numbers for coughing and speaking. But I won't dwell on that because different publications give different results, give different values for these things, which are sometimes different by an order of magnitude. So we have to do more. Clearly, the world has to do more study to understand about coughing and speaking. So the typical cough expels this kind of volume of air when the cough proceeds. The cough lasts about half a second. And then the droplet volume fraction can be anywhere between 10 to the minus 7 and 10 to the minus 4. You see wildly different values being given for this in the atmosphere, in the literature, sorry. And then the aerosol volume, that means the dry volume of what's left over, probably, you know, the virus and many other things left over after everything has dried out, is very small, 40 picoliter. So we know that a very small volume of virus is enough to infect us. And then like this shows that different volumes of speaking eject different droplet numbers of droplets. So this is the diameter of the droplets, and this is the number which is ejected per unit time when you talk. So these are just to give you an idea of you know, where the field is. Before I end, I just want to say that there are many other beautiful questions apart from, you know, the monsoon, Indian monsoon question, which I couldn't talk about today at all, but we're talking about an individual cloud and we're talking about simulations there. So there is this very nice cloud formation called mammatus clouds. It happens a lot over Nepal, Himalayas. It happens a lot in different parts of the world. There is a variant called asperitas. If you're interested in clouds, go and look at it. It's the first time a new cloud has been identified after more than half a century. And this was identified in 2016. So this is an example over Vishakhapatnam in 2018. So with this Megha 5 code, we gave a theory for why mammatus clouds form. And so like we also did some simulations which give this bulbous cloud. So this is a model simulation without noise. So very beautifully these bulbs of the mammatus form. So this was just accepted last week in the Journal of Fluid Mechanics. So this is just to give you an aside about how, I mean, there's like thousands and thousands of problems which, you know, need simulations of this kind, and also theory, hand calculations, experiments, a whole variety of studies are needed. And it's my hope that some of that will be done in India. So I conclude by saying that we know something about cloud flows, but they really need to be studied further. The spread of infection, we don't understand. There's so many questions. There's so many things we don't understand and we need to study. So these two things can be studied by fluid mechanical methods, and it's very important to study them by fluid mechanical methods. And for cloud flows, we're not yet there in terms of resolving every scale and everything very correctly. So we have to do other, models or semi-empirical methods to solve for cloud flows. Whereas the latter thing, coughing, sneezing, etc., you can actually solve for the flow through large direct simulations. Here too, you will need a very large number of parallel computers. So large number of computers working in parallel to solve this, but it is feasible with present day computers. And the important thing is to tie up biology and fluid mechanics so that we can solve this problem. So like one general thing you'll see is that in cloud flows, you need everybody from atmospheric scientists to oceanographers to fluid mechanicians, all kinds of people, including plant scientists. There was a question on transpiration, and all kinds of people, soil scientists, to come together to solve this problem. And similarly, the COVID, epidemiologists, there's a whole variety of people. So we need a very big scale interdisciplinary approach. So this is about what I was planning to tell you. I hope you liked what I said. So thanks for your attention, and I ask Jason now to take over with questions.
Thanks, Rama, for a wonderful talk. So I'll now try to put together the questions that we've received.
Hey, Jason, I just forgot one thing. I
Yes, go ahead,
forgot to thank my present group. I mean, I have not been able to talk about all their work, but it's these people and many other people from whom I've learned a lot, and I've really enjoyed working with all of them. And I've underlined Kruur's name because today's talk has been based in great part based on his PhD work and later work. Sorry, Jason, take over now.
Okay, so before I go to the questions, I would like to first appreciate the fact of how your talk has shown the analogy between coughing on the one hand and the formation of clouds, two phenomena that at first glance seem very different at different scales and have different implications for us. And yet, as you've shown, the underlying physics seems to be quite similar. The approaches seem to be quite similar. And
yeah, although one is pretty and one is ugly.
Yes. Yes, and I think this brings out one aspect of the beauty of fluid mechanics, that the kind of phenomena underlying very different things can be quite similar. Having said that, let's start with a question related to the difference between the two. So in the simulations that you showed of the cloud on the one hand and the cough, the way the jet formed seemed quite different, and the spreading angle, the entrainment seemed different. So could you comment on that and the possible role of maybe the way cough is ejected versus the way a cloud forms?
Yeah. So like this is just one example of how this cloud forms. So you see that if I average it out, there is a kind of growing angle, but that's not very evident. Part of the reason is that we are not able to reach very high Reynolds numbers in this. So if we could go to even higher Reynolds numbers, we'd see a cleaner angle, but still you can see some kind of angle forming already in this thing, especially in the velocity plot. You can see that angle. Now in this one, to tell you the truth, like we need to do a lot more simulations as a preliminary result to understand what is happening. We in fact don't understand why this particular thing is dividing, but it may have to do with the fact that there is, there's a temperature difference and there's gravity, and also like there are walls. So there is a wall here as opposed to, a periodic, a kind of very large flow setup. So we need to do more to answer that question. Yeah, it does look very different. But here too, you can see some kind of angle of spread. You can see that the basic idea of entrainment still holds.
Okay, another question about entrainment. So you had mentioned earlier that the entrainment causes dilution of the original puff or cough jet. In the case of cough, dilution would help evaporation by introducing more dry air. What's the role of that in a cloud? If the initial puff of warm air gets diluted, will that impact the formation of the cloud?
Okay, that's a beautiful question and one that has not been answered yet. It's an open question and like there's many PhDs to be done there. So basically the point is that, you know, like suppose you consider this as the beginning of the cloud and you assume that this is the vertical direction. So like
Rama,
here there's a...
Rama,
Yeah?
sorry, if you're showing something, could you share the screen?
Oh, I didn't realize my screen is not shared.
Thanks.
Okay, let me share it. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Where was I? Yeah, here. Yeah, I was showing this one. So I was saying that suppose this was the beginning of the cloud where there's a lot of water vapor. And then like as you go downstream, dry air comes in. And what was your question again? How does this affect a cloud? Yeah, so suppose this happened in a cloud, then there would be no rain. In fact, like the entrainment angle is very small, like practically zero in a cloud. So the angle is way smaller than what you see in a, behind a rocket which is launching or something like that. So nobody knows why that angle is very small. Let me put it that way. So basically we know that given the amount of water vapor that's reached the top, the angle must be small. And Roddam Narasimha had made some experiments to show that that angle is actually close to zero in a toy model of a cloud. But I don't think anybody's measured it in a real cloud.
Okay, thanks, Rama. So we have another question, very interestingly put, would one be more prone to infections by cough in Mumbai or in Delhi? As a way to ask, essentially, what's the role of the ambient humidity and temperature on the way a puff would or jet would spread, and how long these virus droplets would last? Is that something that we understand?
Right. So the point about temperature per se being, a place being warmer than another place. I'd read things, and I'm saying this as a layperson, that the virus dies at high temperature. And so like temperature itself is enough to kill it, but that I don't know whether it's true or false because there's lots of contradicting evidence on that. But the other point about relative humidity is very easy to answer because in a drier environment, droplets evaporate faster. So you're safer in a drier environment. In a wetter environment, droplets are going to live longer and therefore be carried further. So even the small droplets can actually give infection as opposed to in a dry place where they would be gone.
So since I am sitting in Mumbai, I should be worried?
Yes, you should be more worried than someone sitting in Delhi. Of course, there's so many other factors that humidity is one of the factors.
Another question is regarding the role of masks. So does fluid dynamics tell us something about whether masks will be effective, especially the simple cloth masks that many people are having to use?
Okay, so there's many fluid dynamical studies on masks, and the average, the final, what do you call it, consensus is that they are very effective. Nobody is disputing that they're effective. But to what extent are they effective? That can be a subject of question. So for example, some fluid mechanical simulations show, so shall I stop sharing? I've stopped sharing. So many fluid mechanical simulations show that, when the mask is this way, the air escapes up above and below. So there is a small amount of droplets which are escaping through the sides, but that's much lower than this. And as opposed to the N95 mask, if you have a cloth mask, some of that goes through. So it's like what you would intuitively expect.
So the masks have a role both for the person who may be coughing, as well as for the bystander who might inhale these.
Exactly, exactly. And there's lots of people designing cheap masks, and there's a lot of things going on there.
So, yes, another question is, we'll take one technical question from someone who is clearly a fluid dynamicist. So the question is that in the case of a cough, it seems like a situation of decaying turbulence, since it's a puff that then kind of the velocity keeps dying out. And the question is whether a cloud is decaying or forced, and whether this is something that plays a significant role in its dynamics.
So technically, the cloud is not quite in decaying turbulence. The reason is that there is input of energy into a cloud. So I mean, even a cough that way is not in completely decaying turbulence, because like you would call something decaying turbulence if its kinetic energy started with a number and just went down, down and down. So like in a cloud, there's a way for the kinetic energy to go a little bit up because potential energy is gained. When it's lighter and it climbs, it's losing potential energy, which can get converted to kinetic energy. In a cough also, there's a small amount of that happening because droplets are doing phase change, and the latent heat that's given out, so chemical energy is being converted to potential energy by phase change, and this potential energy can then get converted to kinetic energy. So there's a small amount of injection of kinetic energy, but on the whole, it's overwhelmingly decaying. A cloud also decays after a while, but the amount of energy it injected into it is larger than otherwise. So if you in fact keep a movie camera, you know, on your terrace, you can see that clouds do decay.
Yes, we have a question regarding related to clouds and the role of pollutants on the formation of clouds. Since I mean, especially aerosol pollutants, what role they play.
So yes, they're asking how pollutants affect cloud formation.
Yes, how a pollution and the increasing pollution would affect
cloud formation. Yeah, so like the consensus among a lot of atmospheric scientists now is that as you increase the number of aerosol particles in the atmosphere, you have more condensation, more cloud condensation nuclei, as I mentioned. You have more places for water droplets to condense. So you have many, many more droplets. But because you have so many more droplets, very soon all the water vapor is used up in these droplets and they don't grow very big. So in a cleaner environment, you have fewer and larger droplets. And in a dirtier environment, you have many more and smaller droplets. And so the chance of rain is lower in a dirtier environment. But there's contradictions to counter examples to all of this because there's so many other processes in place.
So I guess cloud seeding is in some sense related to this, where the idea is to supply aerosols directly into a cloud.
Yeah.
But I guess this is also something that we don't fully understand.
Yeah.
Its impact.
Yeah, we know it kind of works, but yeah, we don't fully understand. So when you know that something is very, very super saturated and in a clean environment and not raining, you can actually seed the thing.
Yes, we have another question from a person who's wondering whether what we've understood about cloud physics so far, whether this has been incorporated into our meteorological predictions, and how do these sort of predictions work vis-a-vis this kind of physical understanding.
Okay, so some amount of it has been incorporated into, you know, big climate models and things, but for the most part, like that lies in the future. So a lot of people are trying to do many different things. One is the cloud, they're trying to, you know, go into real clouds and measure them. They're trying to make cloud-like things in the lab, and they're trying to do simulations, not of the direct variety that I talked about today, but these things called large eddy simulations, which are actually, solving the Navier-Stokes and the large scale and doing something empirical for the small scale. So they're doing that kind of thing, and these hopefully, like now there's in the world a few of these codes which are running quite well, and hopefully they will improve feedback into climate models, and that will help in predictions. Right now, clouds are the big black box, the big source of error for all these predictions.
Yes, another question is regarding the chemistry of these aerosols, whether these things are incorporated into fluid dynamic models, and what their role is in the cloud formation.
Okay, they should be, but up to now, they typically are not. So it will be nice if some small scale simulations are done to understand, things like hygroscopic behavior, water repellent behavior, and bring this into the fluid mechanics. At least in big turbulence simulations, these are not incorporated. Sorry.
So there's a question regarding the variation of cloud formation physics and therefore the rain we experience in different parts of India. So essentially, the viewer wants to know whether differences in the topography and local weather in different parts of India, how this affects, whether this can be understood through physics.
Yeah, we know some broad things, like even in high school, we've learned that there's a windward side and leeward side of a mountain. And we know that the Himalayas give us rain, the Western Ghats give us rain. So the basic summary here is that every time you have winds that are coming together at the level of the ground, and then they, when things converge, so when winds come together, you get a climbing. So you get what is called a convection. And every time this happens, water vapor is carried from the ground up. And so like the presence of a mountain or something aids in that. It takes the thing up, and then you can get rain over there. So topography, local conditions, and like this person had asked about transpiration, the forest cover, all these local things make a huge difference to cloud formation and also therefore rainfall.
Yes, so I guess this question goes back to the importance of studying clouds as a collective system, where we have a lot of work to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's probably another very big open question and a very important one.
Okay, so I think with that we've covered most of the questions. Since we have a few minutes more, Rama, maybe you can, especially for the young students or young scholars who are tuning in, you could maybe tell them how, if someone, a school student or someone in the early college years is interested in working in an area like the monsoon physics and cloud physics, how they could go about approaching that. Since we don't really have a BTech program in climate science or cloud physics, so what would be different ways a person could who wants to work in this area could think about it and make a begin?
Yeah, in fact, I think if somebody wants to enter this area, then there is something for everybody. Like a person who studied, an undergraduate degree in history can actually, study the monsoon. A person who studied geography has so much potential to study, problems of this kind. So I don't think they'll be limited by background. And in particular, if they've studied like physics or any of the engineerings, except maybe computer scientists can solve this problem they're also very important for solving this problem, but from a different angle. So so like you can actually teach yourself the basic physics, you can study the fluid mechanics. In fact, it's a pity that fluid mechanics is not a core subject in many physics curricula as well. So if you're coming from a physics background, you need to teach yourself a bit of fluid mechanics before you're ready to go. But most other people can actually hop into this and there'll be something for them. Of course, biologists, everybody.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rama. I think with that, we've covered most of the questions, and I would also like to thank all the viewers for their many interesting questions and careful attention. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sushila.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Rama and Jason, for your time and for the session today. You know, when we first talked about the topic, in my mind, it was, you could never imagine that soft, pretty, fluffy thing, white thing up there, and a dreaded virus could have anything in common. And today you've really taken us through exactly how these things do have a lot of commonality. And it was a very imaginative topic, and obviously a very imaginative talk as well. You know, during the IIT industry conclave a couple of months ago, we had we heard this theme repeatedly about the importance of cross-disciplinary collaborations and about work that has to be done, across disciplines. And today you've given us an example of exactly how that happens, between something that is to do with a pandemic and clouds and monsoon. And obviously that same theme goes across many other things. There's rocket science as well that uses similar concepts. So thank you for that. It was brilliant, and it was very nice to understand why this kind of cross-disciplinary thinking, inculcating that amongst us and amongst our students is so important. And Abdul Kalam, I think, used to talk about this repeatedly. He used to say, why developing the scientific temper amongst everyone is so important for our country to become a leader. And as part of our mission in IIT ACB, we believe that it is important to take topics of science and technology to the layperson as well as the person who specializes or works in that area. And today you've done a fantastic job of bringing the ideas of fluid mechanics and really explaining how it matters in everyday concepts and everyday happenings. Really speaking, we take so much for granted, the processes that go on around us, the phenomena that happen around us. We take all of that for granted. But behind that is solid science, and you've really demonstrated how that works. But I think the best way of describing today's session came from one of our viewers who said, I wish you had been teaching us at IIT Delhi in the 70s, because for the first time after all these years, I've actually understood something of fluid mechanics. So congratulations, Rama. I think you've done a phenomenal job. And Jason, thank you so very much for doing such a brilliant job of moderating and pulling the questions together. We had so many questions, and it was lovely the way you tied them in together to bring out the themes that evolved from there. Our viewers, thank you all for participating. Thanks for the questions. And please do tune in to the IIT ACB YouTube channel. We put all of our talks up there, so you will see them there. But more importantly, please do stay tuned, because we will bring you a wide variety of topics and subjects from some wonderful speakers. Like today's talk, you're going to experience many more talks. So please do tune in. And I just want to say thank you to everybody.